Okay, everyone. We're starting the stream here. We'll get the show started shortly, but as always, we start a few minutes early with the stream, and I'm really proud to welcome to the stage Rik just momentarily. So hang in there. You still have time to get your popcorns. We'll start in a couple of minutes. So welcome, Rik. Welcome to the stream.
Thank you. You didn't say I could have popcorn. I would have prepped.
So we're still in the pre-show for a couple of minutes, like while people join. We have quite a good sign up on meetup.com for this afternoon session. I think we were almost 100 who signed up. That doesn't mean 100 people show up, but at least that get notified about what we're doing here today. But first of all, thank you for taking the time, Rik, to join me here today.
It's a pleasure. I mean, like I said to you when we first connected up today, I was so disappointed because you invited me to come and speak in Copenhagen, and then I couldn't, and I got the Danish bow tie and everything. So this is a reasonable second best that I still get to do the user group for you, even if I don't get to experience war pigs.
Yeah, and I would have taken you to every Michaela bar in Copenhagen, and of course dinner at Warpix. That goes without saying. So rain check.
Definitely, yeah. Once we're out of lockdown, right?
Once we're out of lockdown. So we still do the Azure user group planning meetings. Now we can get back together. We do them at Warpix actually.
Nice.
because we can. Okay, great. So I think we're okay to warm up for a minute or two more before we get into the content, and I'll give you a proper introduction for the recording at least. So are you keeping busy with this cloud thing?
Surprisingly, actually, yeah. I mean, when we first went into lockdown here in the UK, a lot of customers started coming and saying, "Oh, we've sent everybody home, and now we need to automate, and we need to do integration projects and all that kind of stuff." That has leveled out now, but now we're into the okay, and now we've realized it's a good thing to do, and it's a strategic thing to do, and we're getting bigger projects with more planning and organizations realizing that all of that stuff that they put off doing for years because they didn't think it was valuable actually is really valuable, and now they really want to do it. So the nature of the work shifted a bit, and the biggest change actually has been the shift from physical to virtual. Most of my life used to be in a room with a whiteboard with 15, 20 more people in there as I bounced from topic to topic and draw all over the walls. You can't do that in the same way online. And I don't know what you found in meetings, but we've had to sort of shrink the numbers, and I've had to dial back my excitement a little bit, which is really hard.
So we found a tool that's quite useful for ideation, which is called Miro.
Okay.
It's kind of a whiteboard thingy, but you can't really draw, but you can do a lot. Miro is broadly used in the development community.
Right.
So that can definitely be recommended. And of course, it's software as a service. So no reason to install any servers.
I do use the Microsoft Whiteboard app quite a lot. I like that because we can drag lots of people in and do it collaboratively. And that works
the Microsoft Whiteboard, yeah. Just wish they integrated into Teams, and don't tell me they have, and I have missed it.
Not properly. Let's be honest. You can start a whiteboard in Teams, but it doesn't. And if people aren't in your organization, they can't draw on the whiteboard.
So I'm on a Mac, so
separate app and share it separately.
I'm using a Mac, so I basically don't have any hands.
Step into the light.
I have all the features of 2019 or 2018. So, Rik, thanks for joining us. I just needed to do a quick intro here. We have quite a good attendance, so let me just open with some practicalities, and then we'll get back to having you on the stage here. So first of all, everyone, thanks for joining the stream. If you're watching the recording, thank you so much for your attention. I promise you, on behalf of Rik, an action-packed 1 hour of cloud migration stories.
No pressure then.
Of course, we understand that Rik is working as a consultant, so might not be able to share all the details and internals. But I really appreciate you taking the time, because Rik has really seen a lot of cloud migrations from his chair, and it's actually one of the highest requested topics when we surveyed the user group just before the summer. Was, hey, let's get some insights on cloud migrations. But before we get to that, I wanted to advertise the next couple of weeks of speakers. So next week we have the awesome Glenn. So also an Azure MVP. He comes and gives us cloud secrets on the new Azure Digital Twin. And Glenn is one of the few people I know that has actually been working with Digital Twin. And as you can imagine, me working at Maersk, we actually have built our own digital twin. So if there's anything we can shortcut there, this is going to be really, really interesting for the connected factory, in my case, connected vessel, connected containers, but also whatever you can connect it, connected trucks, connected cars, etc. And then we just announced yesterday that on the 9th, so 9/9, we will have 9 cool features on AKS. So I did that. Did you see what I did there, Rik? No one had a comment on Twitter. I thought it was awesome. Anyways,
you realize that's almost a dad joke, isn't it? Look, son, I've been so clever. Oh.
Thank you for calling out the dad joke. That was actually why I was proud. So please sign up on Meetup to get notified on these events, and of course join us on the days. So a bit later today, I'm going to ask you to do a survey. And this is probably the quickest survey in the history of surveys. It's like, I always say, it's like you will get time back when doing the survey. So quick is it. So it's like 4 questions. How did we do? How was the topic? How was the quality of the stream? And what would you like to hear in upcoming meetups? So stay tuned for that. I'll post a link. Or if you have a phone, you can even grab it here. And just be sure to give us your feedback before you leave, right? Because once you're out of this broadcast, we know you will forget about it. And then find us all the recordings of Cloud Secrets to Go, and we also did Cloud Talks before the summer break, is on our YouTube channel. Greg, I need like a YouTube catchphrase, don't you think? Like that would be really dad jokey. We're on Meetup, Azure User Group Denmark, and of course, find us on Twitter. We really appreciate your support there. So with that, once again, Rik, welcome. And thanks for calling out my dad joke. I will not forget you for that.
That's the kind of friend I am. I'm supportive. You know, I'll tell you when something's going awry.
That's true enough. So, Rik, would you mind if we have known each other for a number of years now, but would you mind doing your own introductions?
I can certainly do my own introduction. Yes, absolutely. I have a slide for that, funnily enough. But before I do, actually, Rasmus, you are the only reason this session exists, and I actually want to thank you for that, because you told me what you wanted and I completely ignored you. But hopefully in a good way, because actually you're right. Cloud migration is something that everybody asks about, and everybody asks how everybody else does it. And I always see the same missteps and that kind of stuff. So it's great to be able to share. And I'm really pleased to be sort of here sharing with you as well. You know who I am, Rasmus. I mean, I'm Chief Consultancy Officer for a company in the UK called Black Marble. I've been an Azure MVP for 6-7 years now. I forget, they blur. And this year I was also awarded as a Microsoft Regional Director, which I think you are as well, aren't you, Rasmus?
I am, yeah. Welcome to the club.
They'll have anybody in this club. For those who don't know, I don't work for Microsoft. I don't have a region, and I'm not a director. It's sort of a commercial analog for the MVP program, if you like.
I wouldn't call it that. It's about thought leadership and community leadership. So representing we're presenting sort of Microsoft's values on diversity and also being a thought leader and providing feedback.
You are so eloquent. So I like to think of it a bit. So because I interact very much with CXO level people these days, it is very much about explaining technology to people who don't necessarily know it, thinking about business value and trying to feed that back to Microsoft at a different level than the MVPs that are all about technical. And as a result of that, not as a result of becoming a regional director, but as a result of my role, I find that now I'm having less technical conversations about technical matters. And that's kind of what I've tried to do in the session that's coming up. So I've already said to Rasmus he can interject and chip in as much as he likes. So hopefully ask questions as we go. He'll have the awful job of trying to keep me to time, and we'll see where we are with that. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm Rik Hepworth everywhere. My GitHub is on this slide deliberately because when I finish speaking, I will upload the deck to a presentations repo that's on my GitHub, so you can go and find it and download it and plagiarize it and do with it what you will. So we've got some content. So I thought I'd start with the obvious one. This is basically Rasmus said to me, look, we want to do a session on migrations. We really want you to tell us, let's talk about how we migrate stuff to the cloud. So I sat down with a blank deck and thought, right, all right. So you're moving your app to the cloud. Right, let's talk about how we do it. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that actually the first thing you need to do is not do it. Now, I don't mean throw away the idea of moving to the cloud. I mean, you need to stop and think. And the reason for that is because I get called in a lot when projects aren't quite going the way that they were hoped to go, and something's not working right, something's costing too much, something's gone wrong. And with every single one of those engagements, it's not because there weren't brilliant engineers working on this and there weren't fantastic managers involved. Nobody was doing a poor job. It was because nobody did the thinking up front. So for a few minutes, I just want to talk about that thinking. And hopefully those of you watching will go, yes, we've done that. We've absolutely done that. Fantastic. Tick, feel validated. If you haven't and you go, I can't answer those questions, that's fine. Don't worry, but press the pause button and have a bit of an introspection on your project. And the first question I always ask when somebody wants to talk to me about migration projects is I always ask why. There's a sort of an adage in consultancy, certainly in the UK, where you keep asking why until you get to the money. And really, that's true of cloud. It's not necessarily money, but there has to be some good business reason why your organization wants to move to the cloud and wants to move this particular application that you're looking at to the cloud. Now, I'm going to throw in a whole load of examples and anecdotes as I'm talking. I'm going to start with an obvious one this time, which is I do quite a bit of work with software development houses in the UK who have a product, usually a boxed product. They've had it for several years, back from before I had grey hair, distributed on CD, installed on servers on a customer's tin. And the customers are saying, we no longer want to manage the resources that host your application. We like your application. We want to continue using it, but we're only going to use it if you provide it to us as a service. And a lot of software vendors that I work with are trying to pivot potentially quite quickly because their customers never give them lots of notice of this, to be able to host their application in the cloud and present it to their customers as a SaaS app. Completely valid. That absolutely. It's a clear business reason. You've got some solid drivers and you understand the why. There's also the obvious one of we pay an absolute fortune for that tin shed over there, and the lease is coming up, and the racks that are in it are going to be replaced, and the servers that are in it are going to be replaced. We do not want to spend a fortune in capital budget to renew all of that. We'd like to move to the cloud. Again, good solid business reason. And the third one that is valid is the thing you want to build, you can only do in the cloud. Now you might say, but Rik, that's not really a migration. But I don't necessarily agree with that. You've got an on-prem product, you want to add new functionality, and the functionality you want to add is, I don't know, something that's in cog services. It might be it's speech to text, or it's captioning of videos or something that you could build yourself, but that's a lot of investment. Why not just use a cloud service? And if we're going to use a cloud service and we have to use cloud, well, maybe we should think about putting the rest of the app there. The two that I actually normally encounter, and I have to do my best school teacher, look over glasses and say I'm very disappointed when I hear them, because we think we should. That's not a valid reason. A consultant came and told us we should is not a valid reason. The consultant could be giving you best advice. Obviously, if it was me, I always give best advice, but not always. You always have to filter this with what's in it for the consultant. I've been to several organizations, one not that long ago. It was an organization that got a really good on-prem product. They wanted to move to the cloud because they were being pulled there by a customer. And they were told by a consultant that the correct way to move the app was to containerize it, because that was going to be quicker and cloud agnostic, and it will be better. And the team asked me to help sort of validate the architecture and stuff. And I said, well, what's the app? And they said, well, it's mostly an IIS.NET website. We've got some Windows services and that kind of stuff. Okay, fair enough. Well, containers is valid. Have you looked at PaaS services? Have you looked at any alternatives? And the team said, well, actually, yes. We had a Spike project, and we basically lifted our code and dropped it into app services as an API app. It took us a couple of weeks, and it looks like it works fine. And it's really scalable, and we understand it, and we think we've got a journey there. But this consultant said we should use containers. We don't really understand containers, which is why we're asking for help. And I said, well, the PaaS architecture is as valid as the container architecture from a technical perspective. And if you understand that one, stick with the one you know. Don't necessarily listen to the consultant who might well be trying to sell you on the back of it container consultancy services, or he works for an organization that is going to get something off the back of that. The moral of all of this, if you don't know why you are doing this migration from a business perspective, not a technical one, a business one, the project will fail. It won't necessarily fail because you, the technical team, do a bad job. You might do the most wonderful, beautiful, architecturally perfect migration you could ever imagine, with zero bugs and no downtime and everything. But if it doesn't actually meet the need of the business that's driving the move to the cloud, it's not going to deliver the business value, and it's a failure. You've missed the target. Beautiful shot, lovely arrow, nice bow, but you still missed. And that's the thing I see the most. I see great projects delivered by great teams, but they don't deliver what they were supposed to. Is not the right word, because sometimes this is a techie to business conversation.
So I have a question.
The second thing you've got to answer, why is Rasmus grilling?
I have a question.
There are many projects like that.
No, you just touch on the container stuff. And don't get me wrong, I love containers.
I know you're the largest shipping user of containers in production globally. Feel free to get that joke in again, Dad.
No, I can do that joke anytime. But on the container part, is that something that's trending in your line of business? Is like, we need to move to Azure Kubernetes service. We are getting a huge demand in from developers to host containers, etc. Are you seeing that as a driver to move to cloud itself, or how's that trending in your line of work?
A bit. I'm seeing an awful lot of conversation around containers, and not all of it is valid. I hate CV-driven development. And I've seen so many customers, particularly when they're using contractors, that people arrive in the organization and want to upskill and try and use that organization as a springboard to others. So I think containerization is a very valid solution to quite a lot of problems, but I think people choose it for the wrong reasons. And some of those reasons I am not convinced are valid reasons. The biggest one that's put forward to me is we want to be able to run anywhere. We want to be able to run on premises or in cloud and on any cloud. And containers is probably the most flexible way of delivering on that aim, right? It's a valid technology choice at that point. The problem I have is the premise that choice is made of is not necessarily valid, because if it's an internal application, why do you want to run it on premises anymore? You're moving to the cloud. Pick the best way of doing it. If you are an organization that's choosing a cloud vendor, unless you're building multi-cloud because you're using specific Lego bricks from the different clouds as best of breed, I have never encountered an organization that moves from cloud provider to cloud provider. And AKS, Azure Kubernetes Service, is brilliant. AWS have a similar service. Google have a similar service. But you've got to wrapper that in other components to be able to publish your app and manage your app and monitor your app. And they're all different. So where's the cloud portability? Because I've built my code and I've possibly made our life more complicated because we've got a steep learning curve to understand all of that. But I haven't actually made it that easy to move because of all of the stuff that's around it.
No, I much agree. And the thing with like this multi-cloud Kubernetes service is that you're front-loading a whole load of development activities in establishing the infrastructure, and you can't really go live before it's there.
Yeah.
And what's the reason, right? Because you always will struggle with portability of your data store, which is a much higher degree of complexity than infrastructure hosting. So thank you for that response. I didn't want to hijack your conversation. It's just
no, that's
a
cool.
hot topic everywhere is AKS.
There's a lot of valid reasons for containers. And I'm involved in projects where we're using containers because we want portability. And it's what is the artifact we're moving around between our different stages of dev and production. There's lots of valid choices. We've got legacy stuff that we just can't do in any other way. But just because you choose containers to host a legacy portion of your application doesn't mean you have to deploy AKS to host the container. You know, other choices for container hosting are available, particularly in Azure, right? You can put it in ACI, you can put it in app services as a container. Other options may be there. It's no different than every other development fad. And again, that sounds like I'm knocking containers, and I'm not, but people tend to jump on the latest thing because it's the latest thing, not because it's the right thing. I've got several examples of that as we get deeper into the grass. So let's see how we go. Anyway, back to the plot. We have a plot. We spent a fortune on special effects. The other thing that I always see people trip up on is, do we understand the cloud? Now, I don't mean this from the perspective of you, the developer, or you, the ops guy, you, the person building the infrastructure as code pipeline, any of the technical stuff. Do you understand the services in the cloud and how you develop against them and how you use them? That's fine. We're all really smart people, right? Given a set of documentation or a training video, we can learn. And we've got experience and we can apply that experience. Where it falls down is the communication between the technology team and the business about risk and constraints. And I have seen these bite organizations so many times. And particularly being in the UK, where we're going through this great period of change as we detach ourselves from Europe, things are going to get interesting, ultimately around regulation and that kind of stuff. You know, do we know what constraints are placed upon the industry that we are in? Or if we're creating a SaaS app, do we know what constraints are placed upon our customers? Now, there's an obvious one there. So I've worked with an organization that works with law enforcement, policing, that kind of stuff. And they work in the UK, they work with European organizations, they work in the US. Originally, their solution was on premises. Nice and easy because the customer has a couple of servers and the data is stored on the customer site. As soon as you turn it into a cloud service, The obvious thing from us as a provider is, well, I want to deploy one set of services in one place and manage them once. Well, that's not going to work for that market, because American law enforcement needs its services to be running in the American cloud. To be fair, they actually need it to be running in the US Gov cloud, which means you need to work out and understand how you apply to use the US Gov cloud, but that's a different story. You know, I cannot think of any European police force that would like its data stored in the UK after January. Can you? So we have to think about and understand how regulation and laws and data requirements affect how we use the cloud, where we put our data, how our data moves around, that kind of stuff. And it sounds obvious, and it is obvious, but you would be shocked, I hope, at how many times I encounter organizations that missed a bit. And it's not because they didn't think to ask the right questions, it's just that the right people weren't necessarily in the room at the time. Spent a long time with an organization in the UK. We migrated their then TFS to Visual Studio Online, Azure DevOps Server to Azure DevOps, whatever it's being called now. And we worked really closely with the technical team, with the management of the technical team, moved code, pipelines, boards, the whole lot. Brilliant. Moved it from an on-prem server in the UK to Amsterdam, because that's where Visual Studio Online was hosted. Nothing in the UK at that point. And everything was fine until there was a check from somebody in that organization who dealt with sort of compliance and regulations. And they said, you do know that source code is covered by UK export law, don't you? And technically, by putting it in Amsterdam, you've just broken that law. Can you go and get everything and put it back, please? It's really hard to do a reverse migration of Visual Studio Online to TFS, as it turns out. And the moral of that story is you need to talk within your organization to the right people, to the people that know. As a technical team, it's your responsibility to reach out to them and find the answers to those questions, because the chances are the business hasn't thought of it, and you're on the tip of the spear for doing the work, and therefore the repercussions are coming your way. But the opportunity to fan out and investigate and do that learning is also with you. We also know, or we need to know, about how we're going to buy this mythical cloud thing. I'd like some cloud, please. Just back a truck up to the office and away we go. Do we know how we're going to buy it? Now, I don't just mean are we going to slap a credit card down, although please God don't do that. And I have seen large organizations do that, and the person whose company credit card it is leaves and everything stops within 30 days. In Azure specifically, we can buy this directly from Microsoft. We can have enterprise agreements, or the MCA way of purchasing stuff. Or it might be better for our organization to go with a CSP, a cloud solution provider. And that's because there's a managed service wrapper to that. Now, if I'm an organization that's building a SaaS app and presenting that to my customers, the chances are I'm going to pick more that direct Microsoft relationship, because I want to be in complete control of all of my estate, my resources, the whole lot. But if I'm an organization where I'm trying to move to the cloud to drive business value, I may not want to do some of that management task. I may be better off buying it as a managed service. So you, the development team, are driving value, and the stuff that would just slow you down and take you away from being productive is handled by the reseller, perhaps. That might be valid. And the other biggie is we've got to understand how we're going to manage it. And this is as simple as, please don't put your dev stuff in a production subscription, to all the way up to proper management of least privilege, and only our automated deployment pipelines can actually do stuff in certain subscriptions, and our support engineers have accounts which are managed with things like privileged identity management, so they can't do anything unless there's an audited workflow. The moral of all of this one is, I'm really sorry, but you need some governance, and you need to understand what your compliance regs are. It doesn't have to be this huge upfront, we're going to write this massive multi-thousand page Bible of how we're going to use cloud. But you need a framework within which you, the project team, and the rest of your business can deal with the cloud and understand how you're going to do it. Because at the end of the day, your customers, your auditors, your external regulatory bodies are going to come to you and say, prove to me that when you built this application, you had all of this security in mind and you've ticked all of these boxes. And you want to be able to point to something and say, there's our guidelines, there's our framework that tells us how we implement the guidelines, and there's our documentation that says the app is implemented in line with the framework. And everybody's happy. So, you've all grokked that, right? Everybody knows and understands that. So we now know, why we're moving to the cloud from a business point of view. What value are we trying to get out of this? What great new world order, what wonderful, glorious, dawning new reality are we pulling our organization into? And we've identified and worked out how we're going to manage and mitigate the risks. Brilliant. Now what? So we can all sit down and start cutting code, right? No. Because this is a migration. I see very much somebody gets pulled into an organization to help migrate the application for, I don't know, business function X or Y to the cloud. And that person has been hired in. And the first thing they say is we need to do a complete re-architecture and rebuild. Why? Well, I didn't architect the first one. Yeah, that doesn't mean it's invalid. There are lots of different ways that we can migrate an app to the cloud. A complete re-architecture greenfield is perfectly valid if there are good reasons to do that. But the flip side is completely true as well. So most organizations that I work with want to get into the cloud quickly. And there's usually reasons around that. And in the case of the SaaS providers, there's always some big customer that says, we're going to come up for renewal in 6 months. We want a SaaS offering by the time we renew, or we're not renewing. Panic. That's fine. There are quick ways into the cloud. We've still got to do our validation and all that kind of stuff, but there's nothing wrong with doing a short, we're going to build an IaaS replica of what we put on our customers' premises. But that's our first step. And then we move on from there. In order to make the decisions about what is the best approach for migration, we need to understand our application. We need to understand the technologies that it's built on. And those technology choices and how old they are is going to influence things. If it's written in VB4, you might want to think about a different approach than if it's written in C#. I was asked by a customer only several weeks ago if we could come in and help fix an active server pages application that nobody had the source code for anymore, and it only ran on one particular version of IE because they couldn't replace it for another 11 months. If you've got an application which you've been keeping up to date, which the technology is relatively up to date, why throw away the investment in that technology? If you've got an app where you're going to have to rewrite anyway because of what the thing's written in, broaden your set of choices. You need to understand how your application deals with data and where does it put it, and how do things communicate internally within the app. Another organization was starting to look at cloud as the UK went into lockdown, and it understood why it wanted to move to cloud. It wanted to move to cloud because it wanted to make it easier to present this particular application out to its customers, because then it would make certain things easier for the customer, but therefore drive more business for them. And it was going to be a whole lot more straightforward to put the website that we were talking about in the cloud, because it was going to be more accessible to customers. And when we looked at that, we looked at it, and they got a pretty current .NET website, and they got some Windows services written in .NET. So we looked at those. And we said, well, why don't we try a bit of a Spike project? You've got a lot of skills in .NET. Let's not move away from that as a technology project. Let's see, A, if we can do a quick drop it in the cloud, and B, then how that would influence our choice moving forward. So we took the website, we dropped it in app services, fired it up, and it worked. Woohoo! We looked at the Windows services, and they'd been written to run as console apps. So with a tiny amount of work, we could take those Windows services and drop them into app services as web jobs. And literally within an hour, we'd got those running in app services. At which point we could sort of stand back and go, okay, well, that was quick and easy and is valid. What next? And the first thing of what next was the customer said, well, actually, it was really easy to move those Windows services, but we also think we can pull the business logic out of them really quickly, and we could package it up in functions. So that might be a way of making it cheaper and more effective to run. Brilliant. Starting to see the roadmap building here of we need to get something in quickly. Let's crest the first hurdle with as few changes as possible. Focus on the things we've never done before, like how do we secure this app in the cloud? How do we publish it out to our customers safely and securely, all that kind of stuff. Right, what's next? What's next was the SQL server that this system talked to. And the snag was it was a 2.8 terabyte database. One of them was, and we got cross-database queries, and we'd even got some CLR in there just for a laugh. Like the 2.8 terabyte database was mostly because there were binary objects in the DB. And there were other things that basically meant they could not just lift it and put it in Azure. And when we looked at how long it was going to take to fix this, it was difficult. It was complicated. There were lots of rewrites, not least of which because we've got to suck all of those blobs out and put them somewhere else and change the application so it deals with blobs differently, all that kind of stuff. And then we'd have to find and rewrite all the stuff that was using SQL CLR, that kind of thing. So we said, okay, well, we've identified what needs to be done in that. We've got a set of tasks. We've got a clear direction of travel for that. But is there a way that we can get most of the app in the cloud to solve the business reason, which was we want to make it easier for customers to access it without having to delay for however long? And the answer was, yeah, sure. Let's just leave the SQL DB on-prem. Let's look at an interim solution that allows the web stuff that's now in the cloud to talk back to SQL on-prem. So we looked at Azure Relay. Drop that in with no change to the code. It just connected to the SQL DB and off it went. And we could do some testing to prove that it was performant, and we could do some validation to prove that it was secure. The key moral of that one is we've followed what the business was trying to achieve to give a return for the business, to give a benefit to the customer. That has generated the time, potentially the revenue, and freed up some of the effort of the dev team to focus on the difficult bit of the migration. And once we've tackled the difficult bit, then we can move further forward and look at how we embellish the app, improve the app over its life cycle. So the moral of what I'm trying to get at with this slide really is it's okay working through and asking these questions of your application, but you've got to look at them through the lens of your business drivers. Everything you do as a technology team should be focused on what the value is for the business. And a complete rewrite in a different language doesn't give any value to the business particularly quickly. It might be technologically a good choice, but it might not hit the business need fast enough. So it might be you need to do some things that feel a little bit dirty because we're not doing a pure migration in the first instance to buy yourselves as a team the time to do the better job. Now, that leads me on to this one, which is this is a marathon, not a sprint. This isn't, me getting up and walking down to the kitchen to get a coffee. This is me getting up and walking to a different city with a complete change of scenery. So you always have to have that end goal in mind. So, back to our customer that I was just talking about, the end goal was we want to get this fully in the cloud. We want to get rid of all the local hosting. We want to remove the pain and overhead of managing these SQL servers, backing stuff up, all that kind of stuff. We can put it in the cloud. We can do it more effectively. But that's the mossy hill that we're looking at, going, oh, you know, I'd like to climb up that hill, but we've got to get to that hill first. And that's what the short-term goals of, can we get stuff in the cloud quickly and start to get some return on our investment and some improvement for customers in the shorter term. So you know, you've got to not be afraid to compromise on your perfect technical solution, because that's what the business needs. But you should log that. If you're racking up technical debt, you're gonna have to pay it back at some point, right? You need to know why you made the choices and what you were doing. And in that, cost and time are always the biggies in the decision. But there are other things that you need to think of when you're looking at how you move to the cloud. Not least of which is, how many applications are we moving? My friend Elder, when he's talking about migrations, likes to show a nice little table of right, map your solutions out. And we do the same thing. Map it out in terms of complexity against business value, and use that grid to help work out which are the key applications you should move first and how much time you should spend. And frankly, if it's a gnarly pain in the neck old application that doesn't deliver much value, that's going to be a pain to move, I'd look at getting something else. Is there a SaaS app out there? Is there an alternative we can buy in to do that? Or, you know, can we just leave it there for a while, either to die because we think we can get rid of it, or because by the time we've shifted the other stuff, we've bought ourselves enough efficiency that we can focus on that gnarly little horrible child in the corner. And we need to know if there are any options that we can't pick and why. To give you an illustration of that, I've been watching with interest a couple of email threads that various people I know have been having about provisioning resources in Azure regions around the world. And the Azure teams fight really hard to make sure that they push all of the services into as many regions as they possibly can. But there's a sequence to that, right? And it might be that there are constraints placed upon you, not because the perfect Azure service doesn't exist to build this, but because it's not where you need it to be yet. And you must not, should not build a production app on a preview or a promise. Oh yes, it'll be there in September. Yeah, but what happens if it isn't? Does that mean you can't go live? You know, you need to think about these things. Maybe you're allowed to put your services in the cloud in your subscriptions, but your customers are insistent the data's got to be in theirs. Yeah, we can do that. But we need to know about that constraint moving into it, because how are we going to manage it? How are we going to deal with it? And that leads on to sort of making a map of where we're going. Put those building blocks, put those steps in. So, you know, stage one, we're going to do an IaaS move to the cloud because we have 20 years of knowledge in the organization of running our product for our customers on servers. So we'll do that. But we'll do it properly. We'll build resource manager templates. We'll build all the infrastructure as code. We'll build our automated pipelines to deploy not just the application onto the infrastructure, but also deploy the infrastructure and deploy all the Azure wrappers of the infrastructure. And we've helped organizations do exactly that. And it was a perfectly valid choice for them to get them rolling. But that was a first step. And having got that first step, then they were focused at how they could remove that IaaS foundation and replace it, either with PaaS or, back to the conversation that Rasmus and I had earlier, maybe containerization is the right way of doing it. You know, if you've got some really annoying component, it's almost always creating PDFs. If I had £1 for every time somebody said, we've got this PDF library, and if we put it in app services, it doesn't work. Fine. Put that in a container, run the container somewhere, then go back and you know, keep other stuff in your app services. Do this iteratively. I did some work for an organization where they were moving their on-prem. They were building this SaaS version, and their application was manifold in terms of layers and components. And they've got an Angular website that the users accessed, that talked to a .NET API. So Angular to .NET. The .NET API talked to a Java API. And they got .NET teams and Java teams and separate testers and all kinds of stuff. But when they used to run this on-prem, it was run more or less on the same servers. You know, we got .NET on one thing and Java on another, and everything ran fine. When they put it into Azure, they said to me, well, we're struggling with scaling. You know, as the load increases, the app services is set to scale out, but it doesn't scale out fast enough. It's not really working. We're getting timeouts. We're getting all kinds of issues. So we looked at what they'd done, and it was a reasonable first step. They'd taken their code, they'd put it into app services, but they'd put it consolidated into app services. So there was one hosting plan with 3 websites. So they got Java, .NET, and website. And I said, well, why are they all in the same hosting plan? And I said, well, it's cheaper. Well, it might be, bet it isn't. And what we did was we separated out into 3 separate hosting plans, but each one of those hosting plans was correctly sized for the thing that was in it. So the Angular website, that went in something that was really small because it was just simple serving of files, and half of those could go in the CDN, right? But it would scale really quick. The .NET API, we put in something that was a bit bigger because it needed headroom, and it would also scale, but maybe not quite so much. And the Java stuff, because it didn't really scale, it took too long to spin up when you fired up a new instance, we put it in a much bigger hosting plan, and we gave it a couple of instances for resilience, but that was scale up, not out. And the end result was actually no more expensive than what they had to begin with, because everything could scale at different speeds. So that became the next stage on their migration, and they started to put rules and guidance in place for them to follow in terms of how they mixed technologies in services, that kind of stuff. And this sort of leads me on to this. You need to know the difference between a strategic decision and a tactical decision. And interestingly, a friend of mine who used to work for Microsoft, now works for somebody else, said, you know what, in cloud migration, the project is so big that virtually every technology choice is a tactical one. Apart from a few, if you get it wrong, well, in vNext, you can change it, because it's such a fundamental seismic shift to move to the cloud. We're changing everything else. Who cares if we put it in app services now and then crack it open and put it in functions in 6 months? That's fine, so long as we're making that on reasonable information. So the most important thing tends to be, how do we inform those choices? Our telemetry, our knowing what's going on, getting information about performance and bottlenecks and how well things are working to inform those decisions. And then the final thing that I wanted to say on this one is, if you're in a large organization and you are one team migrating one application, in an army of teams migrating a swathe of applications, don't be the one team going over there. Even if it's the perfect choice for you, if everybody else is going that way, it's probably worthwhile, assuming they're valid choices. And in which case, if they're not valid choices, you need to stop and scream and wave flags and go, hey, guys, you're going in the wrong direction. But don't be the only team that decides to use Kubernetes when everybody's going past. Unless there are real valid reasons and you know exactly what they are and you're prepared to fight for them and justify them, because you've taken away your support network. Not just in terms of technical support, you've taken away your management support because you're the only people using this technology. And, if something goes awry, if you need help, if you need support, you're going to have to jump through so many hoops to keep justifying the decisions you made. And they may not have been the wrong ones, but they may not have been the best ones for your organization given the whole context. I've no idea how we're doing for time. I think I had 45 minutes, but we didn't actually start at 1:30. So I'm just going to assume that we're okay, right, Rasmus? Because this is my last slide.
Time is my cue to come in. Okay, if you have one more slide, I absolutely encourage you to go through that. I just want to reach out to our audience today and just ask you to start posting questions. Rik has done this before, so I'm sure he would appreciate your questions. So
Yes.
with that, I'll leave again and let you finish up, Rik. Thank you.
And in fairness, this was always going to be risky, right? Because I'm turning up and doing a non-technical presentation to people expecting a technical presentation. But to those of you that were expecting a technical presentation, I'm doing this deliberately because oftentimes as developers and technologists, we focus on the thing that we're comfortable with. We focus on the code and the process of cutting code and the process of creating applications. And we don't learn about how to talk to the business and understand what it's telling us. And because we don't, we can't then echo back to the business why we're making decisions. And the whole thing ends in that horrible disconnect where the business says, IT never listened to us and they never understand our requirements. And the technologists say they never articulate them clearly. And that's why everything fails. So I wanted to end with a bunch of things that you should absolutely stick in the back of your mind. Things to remember that if you do remember these, your project will go smoothly because they will inform the questions you should be asking. So it's the devil on your shoulder kind of thing. Did you really mean to do that? The absolute big one is cloud is not free. All right. It isn't necessarily cheaper. And when management comes and says that, you need to sit them down quietly and make them a coffee and tell them a story. We choose cloud because it allows us to do things we can't currently. It's about agility. It's about speed. It's not about suddenly removing the entire cost of all of our IT infrastructure estate. And I can see Rasmus smiling because this is what he does for a living, explain to people that cloud is not cheaper. Right, Rasmus?
I absolutely agree. Actually, if you want, if we do the IS foundation that you talked about, my finding is that it's actually quite a lot more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas your rationalization comes in when you start refactoring, re-architecting, and even greenfielding services in cloud. That's where you will see a cost rationale.
Yeah.
But I can talk about that for hours. Yeah, but I totally agree.
IaaS is never a final destination. Oddly enough, there's a point on that in a minute. The second thing that you need to know is telemetry is critical. You should not put an app in the cloud without thinking about how you're going to find out and see what's going on. Some of those things are easier than others, because if you're just sticking it in app services, functions, that kind of stuff, you can probably just turn on application insights and you'll get telemetry almost for free. And it'd be really useful. But you need to think about looking at, in Azure, log analytics, your Azure monitor feed, your audit feed, see what actions are being taken. Keep an eye on the load on your app, the speed of your app. How often does it scale if we've told app services to scale? Because that information is critical for you knowing where you need to focus your efforts in the next phases of migration, where your app's weak, where it's not performant, where you can do the most good with your development effort, or which components you might need to think about replatforming or replacing because they're not either performing well enough or they're costing you a fortune. You've got a beautiful virtual machine in there and it's really expensive, but actually it's costing you a lot of money. But if you look at it, it's hardly doing anything. It's ticking over with not a lot of CPU usage or not a lot of RAM. We need to think about right sizing that, or we need to think about taking the code out of the VM completely and putting it somewhere else. Security is critical, and this is security all the way through. This isn't just me saying you need to put some firewalls in. This is security in depth, defense in depth. It's making sure that you don't have any creds and settings and keys in your code. It's making sure that you've got safe and secure ways of publishing your applications out to the outside world, which might be things like App Gateway. It might be firewalls. It might be putting in things like Azure Sentinel to be monitoring the inbound traffic, looking for threats, looking for people poking you from the outside. But it might also be securing the internal comms of your app. Depending on who you are. I've worked with an awful lot of banks and financial institutions, and they have a simple adage, which is everything is connected via VNet, even PaaS services. We will only use PaaS services that will connect to VNet. And if that means we have to use an ACE or an ICE, fine. We take the hit on cost because security is paramount. I'm a big banger of the drum that you don't need to do cloud to be able to do DevOps, but if you're going to do cloud and you're going to do cloud successfully, you really should be looking at DevOps. If you don't have good communication between what used to be your ops team running the servers and they're now going to be running some of the fabric and the platform of the cloud, and the developers that are putting stuff in the cloud, if you don't have continuous integration, continuous deployment, automated testing, all that kind of stuff, you're not geared up to do the cloud well. And you need to learn, and you need to implement that change in culture. You need to implement that change in process. Do not be afraid to leave stuff on-prem if it's the right place for it. Hybrid is not evil. If your crown jewels are in a SQL server and it's on-prem and you really want to keep it there, that's fine. Make sure you can talk to it. Make sure that wet string is secure. Focus on other things than trying to push data that you're really, really unsure about putting in the cloud into the cloud. Friends don't let friends choose IaaS. Rasmus will tackle me if I start talking about virtual machines. Now, that's not a one-size-fits-all. IaaS is a good gateway drug. It's not your long-term drinking companion. Yeah, IaaS is something you have to do to get into the cloud quickly, and you need to get off it as fast as you can, floor is lava style, to something that's better, that's more efficient, that's more effective, that's better managed, that's going to drive value.
You know I can mute you, right?
Where would the fun in that be?
We have a couple of questions stacking up, so I'll let you finish and then we can get to the questions.
Right. Let's do the last two quickly then. Containers versus serverless is not a hill to die on. Rasmus and I have already had this discussion. It's not worth losing friends because I insist on PaaS and he insists on containers. They're both valid choices. Pick one, just know why you picked it and be prepared to justify it to the business. And then this one, because it happens every time. We're moving to the cloud, right? Now is not the time to pick a new language because you fancy it. And I see this so often. Why did you write that in Go? Oh, well, we fancied learning Go. We'd never done it before. Did you look at the SDK support for Go before you started? No. Have you had any issues? Yeah, the SDK support for Go is really crap. Well then. It's great learning new stuff. We all enjoy it. But you're going to have enough new stuff to learn without it being a language as well. And with that, as I get more and more excited, I'm going to pop up my question slide. Rasmus can start asking me what the audience is spouting on about. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you for putting together the presentation on cloud migration stories, Rik. I really appreciate it. And let me just plus one on your last couple of points on the battle of container versus PaaS versus serverless and languages, etc. It's absolutely not worth losing friends over it. I was probably more extreme when I started my current job and insisted, and it's sometimes it's like water, trying to block water with the hand. It's just gonna flow around it, right? And you won't know about it. So be embracing others' technology choices and believe in yourself, and you would see you're probably right at the end. It's just a matter if we're going a straight line or maybe a short. So let's bring up some questions, and then I have something to end the show with as well. So I can bring them up on screen here. This is one from Morten.
Oh, God.
It's the magic one question.
Come on, Morten. You know me. You asked horrible questions like that. The one thing that I see everybody struggle with is how they manage cloud as a thing, how they manage subscriptions, how they manage user accounts, how they manage applications in that. And it's complicated. If I could make that easier to understand, then I would probably do myself out of a job. Because let's face it, at least 75% of my consultancy is going in and going, oh dear, let's think about separating things out. But it's the foundation upon which everything else is built, and therefore it's the most important, and it's the thing you have to understand before you move forward.
Yeah. Thanks, Morten. Good question. Let's pick up one from Yannick here.
Oh, so I'm a consultant, so I'm going to play my It Depends card. So I would like to say, no, don't empty the data center in 3 months because you're rushing at it and something's going to go wrong. All of this comes back to why you're doing it, right? If you have to empty the data center in 3 months because the contract is going to be terminated and it's out of your control, well, unfortunately, that bus is heading straight at us and we need to try and work out how we can do what we need to get stuff into the cloud. And that comes back to what I was saying earlier, that at that point, an IaaS lift and shift might be your best choice simply because it's your only choice. The critical thing, though, is, again, knowing why. Because an IaaS lift and shift puts you in a cul-de-sac. It puts you somewhere that has given you no benefit. You've simply, as I said on something the other day, you've picked up the pile of magazines from the coffee table and decided you want to put them somewhere else. And you've put them down on the dining table. It's still the same pile of magazines. It hasn't changed. If your organization is able to, I would look at that longer journey, and then the journey becomes a prioritization exercise where you say, well, are there servers we need to replace that applications are on which might influence the order we do things in? Are there particular services that are shared across lots of applications that if we could move those first, they'll give us a lot of value, or that are going to be an anchor that we need to think about how we deal with? Just simply having the time to do the assessment of your applications and realizing if there are some you can jettison and not bother to migrate at all will help you. So if you like, the short answer, but it's flippant, is say no and do the application focused journey instead. But the more nuanced answer is that might not be your decision to make. So you need to ask why. And actually, that's the one thing that I try and teach technical teams that I work with. We don't ask why enough of the business. And if the business would just tell us why, and not just say because in that sort of, grumpy parent kind of way, I've told you you're going to move these applications and you're jolly well going to move them. If we understand why, then we can work out the best way of doing it. So that's my best advice. Don't pick one or the other. Say why and then pick the most appropriate.
Yeah, I must agree. And don't over-engineer it, as Rik says.
Yeah.
I think this is more a comment than a question. I think Morten is having fun. Let's pick another one from Morten. So this is about cloud cost and
yes,
being a blocker for us.
So I do see this a lot, and it always comes. People think the cloud is cheaper, and then I tell them how much it's going to cost, and they go, "That's expensive." And I say, "Well, yes, it is, but if you look at how the billing works, we can start to attribute the cost in a better way." And by which I mean right now, so I'm a Yorkshireman, so I've got deep pockets and short arms. And when I buy a server, it jolly well lives a full life. I tell you, this isn't replace after a couple of years. It's knocking on for retirement when it's finally allowed out the machine room. That's sort of sweating the assets. We can do that with capital expenditure, but the downside is I've got a lot of money I have to find in sort of occasional, every 3 years or whatever. And A, it's a sunk cost, and B, it's probably more than I need to spend because it's got to cope with that varying in demand. The customers that I work with, when we look at costs, we always try and work out what an individual cost of a transaction is that we can then assign that to something in the business. Now, this works really well with PaaS and cost per click, right? I do a lot of integration, and BizTalk was like £30,000 a license, and it was like everybody would squeak. Whereas a Logic app, I can say, right, for every sale you make, this process runs and these steps execute, and it costs this much. It's 3 pence for every sale. Can you see the correlation, Mr. Businessman? Yes, the overall cost of that Logic app every month might be £10,000, but that means there's more than £10,000 worth of sales coming in. And it's all about shifting the conversation to not look at it as cost like we used to do. It's all about value, and it's about unit cost, not overall cost.
Yeah, and that's the kind of conversation you need to have. And that's the kind of value proposition that actually makes cloud super interesting. So we have one more question, but we also we will continue for a few more minutes for the people who can. I just want to encourage everyone just to complete our super quick survey. It's like it's Back to the Future on steroids. You would find yourself getting an hour back just by doing the survey. It's so quick. And now, if you've been on the stream since the beginning, you remember that Rik called out my dad jokes in the beginning. I'm just gonna let this one be on screen, and you can capture the dad joke yourself. So I just wanted to congratulate you on you're picking up fast, Rik.
Thanks,
So
Dad.
you're quite welcome. Let's bring up the last question here, and then I'll thank you one more time for joining. So it's Morten again.
Yes, so that's very true. Costing on-prem is easy because there's usually tin and people, right? And they're really easy to cost. Costing cloud is complicated because there are lots of moving parts. But I like to distinguish between the upfront estimation of costs and the tracking operating costs. Tracking operating costs, I think, is easier in the cloud, because if you've got good governance, if you use things like tags in Azure to tag all of the components of an application and perhaps tag the cost center in your business they're associated with, being able to report on how much a particular department is costing you and move that cost to the right area is a lot easier than if we've just spent, I don't know, £1 million on tin and we can't really work out who's using which bits of it. So that's not to say that estimating the cost of a cloud project isn't hard. You know, we all know and love the beautiful pain that is the Azure price calculator, right? Where you need qualifications all on its own to work out what numbers to punch in. Yes, that's difficult. But I always find that once organizations are in the cloud, they really appreciate the clarity they get of how they can actually monitor cloud costs and point the finger at the people that actually rack them up.
Excellent. Thank you. And with that, we're good to conclude today's broadcast. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Rik, thank you so much for a great presentation. I love your format, you know that, and for keeping it informal. And guys on the chat, thanks for the questions. We're back again next week with Glenn on his introduction of the brand new Azure Digital Twin. So I hope I will see you there. And thank you. Have a good evening and afternoon. See you next time.